have you with us here
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to talk the abolition of nuclear weapons. This is my experience as someone who was born and raised in Hiroshima. I am second generation of Hibakusha. I shall begin by saying that because English is my second language, and talking about my experience in Hiroshima is very difficult even now. So as not become emotional, I will read directly from my prepared notes. I hope you will understand my Welsh Japanese accent. The late Soka Gakkai Josei Toda made historical declaration about the abolition of nuclear weapons on the 8th of September 1957 in front of 50,000 young people. Mr. Toda's declaration was it called for destruction of this devilish nature lurking deep with the lives of human beings. His aim was to establish the idea that use of nuclear weapon was an act that would deny humanity its fundamental right to exist. He hoped that by allowing this idea to penetrate deeply into the heart and the mind of people throughout the world, particularly the leaders in each country, and by establishing this internal criterion, he would prevent the use of nuclear weapons. He meant to crush the tendency in the people's mind to justify the use of nuclear weapons. His goal was to expose and rip out the claws that lies hidden in the very depths of these weapons. Mr. Toda was thus convinced that it is the existence of Buddha nature within human beings that would guarantee the abolition of nuclear weapons without fail. Since human beings created the atomic bomb, it must also be human beings that make possible its abolition. Since then, Dr. Daisaku Ikeda was the foremost peacemaker in the world, carrying on with this movement. He was 95 years old when he passed in 2023 and worked tirelessly for the sake of humanity. I did not understand the depths of Mr. Toda's word at that time in 1957, but my mother carefully explained it to me, and it remained in my heart until today. Mr. Toda's true reason for this declaration was the nuclear weapons and their use must be absolutely condemned, not from the standpoint of ideology, nationalism, or ethnic identity, but instead from the universal dimension of humanity. Nobody has a right to take precious life. Nobody has a right to live life. Everybody has a right to live life. My faith believes in the dignity of life because life is the most precious of all things. On the 6th of August, 1945, the atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima with a population of 350,000. Hiroshima was apparently chosen because of the clear sky overhead that day. Good visibility made it easy to observe the destructive capacity of this new nuclear technology. Under that mushroom cloud, rising out of a temperature of 5,000 degrees, some say 7,000 degrees centigrade, As we know, water boils at 100 degrees and still melts at 1,500 degrees. 70,000 died instantly, and many more afterwards. So within 4 months, 140,000 died, and to this day, people continue to die from radiation-related illnesses. The actual dropping of the bomb took only 10 seconds, but the effects have continued and will continue for generations. I was brought up in a community filled with the family, suffering tremendously from the effect of the bomb. Although I was born 3 years after the bomb was dropped, no information was available as to the possible consequences. Because of that, people are ignorant of the effect of radiation. We grew and ate vegetables from contaminated soil and ate fish from the polluted sea. However, people like me and the others who were indirectly affected by the bombing that day are not counted among the statistics. Even now, there is a lot of suffering behind the closed door. Marriage is very difficult, as it may produce babies with physical challenges. People had lost hope and confidence for the future because they felt that they didn't have the ability to provide for and care for their families. And uncounted atomic bomb orphans. We cannot imagine what kind of life they lived and who were never mentioned. There was high suicide rates among victims and their families, and we did not use a condition called PTSD at that time, but there were many people who had PTSD. They saw loved ones who were melting in the front of their eyes. They witnessed the horror of many burned people crawling to the rivers and dying in the water. This was an absolute land of hell, man-made hell. I remember I was small, even though nobody told me, but I knew not to stare or ask questions about the people whose skin had melted with the intense heat. There are 3 groups of people in Hiroshima. The first one still cannot forget what had happened to their loved one. The second group, it is too painful and it's past, so don't wish to talk about it. I was this category until 2003. And thirdly, like SGI, lay Buddhist movement and other genuine people who dedicate their life to ensure the peace and the security of the land. My family was no exception. All were affected physically and mentally in one way or another. Although I was born 3 years after the bomb was dropped, I was affected more than any of my siblings, and I had the most difficulty with my health. The only explanation was the after effect of radiation. Also, the mental and emotional stress that each one of us bore, because we didn't know what illnesses could be residing in our body and whether they could be passed on unknowingly to our children and grandchildren. One family I remember had their whole skin burned off by the heat. When you are skinless, your body is shiny and pink and in agony. It was horrendous to see. Some people managed to live on for years like this. Another neighbor had such huge burn scar on his back that he looked a bit like a tortoise with a shell. One day, the scar became very itchy, and his family said it was moving. Suddenly, from underneath the scar came huge amount of pus and live maggots. I can never forget those images. And even now, after so many years, it is very difficult to talk about it. Can you imagine if you have to live with and watch those you care for and love undergoing such excruciating suffering? I was the weakest child in the family. I was told by my doctor that I had only a 50% effective immune system. So far, I had lymph nodes and cancers removed from my body. The last cancer operation was on 20th January this year. 16 stitches all over my body now. But the doctors in Japan and in UK are not able to say they are an effect of how I lived in radiation-filled environment. When I was a little older, I used to be involved in the peace movement. I carried a placard to demonstrate for peace. No more bombing, no more war, no more Hiroshima. Each time before I left home to take part in demonstration, my mother would gently shake her head and say, "You cannot change people's heart by carrying a placard." I would say, "I know, Mother, but I want to change the world and change it now." But she never stopped me from doing it. However, she did ensure that I continued to practice. One day, I heard head of state say that he was horrified to hear what had happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And after giving a long speech with many condolences, then said, "But I'm glad this didn't happen to us." This statement horrified me, and I realized that we have a tendency to think, "Thank goodness that wasn't me." It was then that I realized the truth of what my mother had said. This was my turning point. In 2003, SGI President Daisaku Ikeda made a peace proposal in which he talked about a life-sized paradigm for our age. He said, quote, "The way forward, I believe, lies in developing a life-sized paradigm by which to understand our world and where we stand in it." By life-sized here, I'm referring to a way of thinking that never deviates from the human scale. It is simultaneously human sensitivity to life, a whole, and also to detail of everyday human existence. I believe it is an approach that is urgently required in response to the challenge of our age, unquote. When scientists develop the atomic bomb, and when those in power decided to use this weapon on people, and the bomber pushed the button, did they think that their action would have such a devastating effect on all of those individuals who had names, faces, and felt the joy and the sorrow of life? In September 2000, I returned to nurse my dying mother in the hospital in Hiroshima, which treats radiation victims. The doctors gave my mother 2 weeks to live, and my sisters, I stayed with her round the clock. One day I heard a voice from the radio coming from the next room to my mother. I soon realized that it wasn't the radio, but an elderly lady repeating over and over and again, "Mommy, it hurts." She was a little girl again, calling out to her mother. She was a survivor of the atomic bombing, who had lived so long and was ending her life in this way. When her sound stopped after 2 days, I wanted to scream on her behalf, which I did. Eventually, everybody knows that we should not destroy lives, but many don't know how to actually treasure life. I often used to feel overwhelming sorrow, but I know now how to transform hunger, anger, and foolishness, which all human beings have, into compassion, courage, and wisdom, and encourage others to do the same. In October 2006, I finally visited the Atomic Bomb Museum in Hiroshima, which I and my family have never been able to physically do. I entered the building by myself and renewed my vow to work for world peace on behalf of my late parents, elder siblings, and the people of Hiroshima and the world. I hope our voices are loud enough to ensure that this must never be repeated again. I am dedicating my life to creating the cause for peace through the teaching of and the philosophy of Nichiren Daishonin, rather than try to treat the effect. There are still 12,421 nuclear weapons in the world, and 3,750 are actually active warheads. We were sitting on those nuclear weapons every day, and still in the people's mind, nuclear weapons are a necessary evil. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought the threat of nuclear warfare to the forefront. So how would modern nuclear detonation impact the world today? Provide information on the global impact of nuclear war. A group of scientists said, it doesn't matter who is bombing whom. It can be India or Pakistan or NATO and Russia. Once the smoke is released into the upper atmosphere, it spreads globally and affects everyone. What is the purpose of using nuclear weapons to kill human beings? Many believe it was finishing the Second World War with Japan. There are two other reasons in 1945. One, they would like to show how their work performed. And two, they would like to show what America can do to the enemies. What a dreadful thought. I no longer carry a placard to demonstrate for peace, but have a huge banner in my heart for world peace. Hiroshima is now the most beautiful and peaceful city because there are many thousands of people practicing philosophy of deeply respecting the dignity of life. My hope is no children go through what I went through in their life ever again. So I will keep going this humanistic work of abolition of nuclear weapon activity until the last breath of my life. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. Thank you.